Ever feel like relationships, all relationships, are kind of like, those choose your own adventure books, but you kind of miss the warnings page first?
Uh-huh. Totally. Like you're already knee-deep in the plot before you realize you've wandered into the wrong chapter.
Exactly. So today we're diving into those relationship warning signs, those red flags, and we've got a handy guide for you, this Better Up article. It's called 16 Red Flags in a Relationship, Signs You Shouldn't Ignore. Think of this deep dive as, I don't know, like a cheat sheet to navigate those tricky relationship moments.
Right, because sometimes you need that little nudge to see what's right there in front of you.
Yes. And the article jumps right in, no messing around. Basically, red flags are like those warning signs of, let's just say unhealthy behavior, maybe even a little manipulative. And here's the thing, they're not always like, bomb, in your face obvious.
Yeah, yeah. It's more like they start subtle, right? Like a tiny flicker that, if you're not paying attention, could turn into, well, a five-alarm fire.
Okay, so it's about catching those flickers early on.
Exactly. Because what's fascinating and kind of scary is how the article talks about how these things, if you just let them slide, they tend to escalate. Like something that seems small, insignificant even, can snowball.
Which is why this whole recognizing them early thing is so key.
Yeah.
Okay, so the article throws a bunch of red flags at us, right? We've gone through and kind of curated a list just for you of some of the, I guess, most surprising ones, and definitely like the most helpful.
Yeah, and to make it even more digestible, we're going to group them thematically,
Hmm.
help you really connect those dots.
Perfect. Let's start with, I don't know, the control freaks. We all know them, right? Those people who just need to like direct every situation. But is that always a bad thing? Like, is it always a red flag?
Well, it's all about recognizing when that desire for control crosses the line, right?
Yeah.
And the article kicks things off with, boom, controlling behavior as a major red flag.
Hmm.
It's not always as dramatic as like someone dictating your wardrobe or who you can be friends with. Although, uh, side note, those are definitely things to watch out for.
Okay, so it can be more subtle.
Yeah,
What are some like less obvious ways this might show up? This is where things get kind of tricky.
totally, totally. Think needing to approve all your plans,
Yeah.
even if it's disguised as just looking out for you,
Right.
or constantly questioning your decisions, making you second guess yourself all the time.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's like slowly they're chipping away at your autonomy.
And that like erosion of trust and respect that the article talks about, it's a slippery slope.
Huge slippery slope.
Mm.
Because healthy relationships, I mean, any healthy connection, it thrives on mutual respect. You have to have that freedom to just be yourself. So if someone is always trying to control your choices, even in small ways, huge red flag.
Okay, that makes sense. And that actually leads us to another one that kind of blew my mind, honestly, which is love bombing. Because who doesn't love being, showered with love and affection? But the article presents a different way of looking at it. They're calling it a manipulation tactic.
Yeah, that one can be tough because, like you said, it feels really good initially, but it's about the intent behind it.
So unpack that for us. Why is this actually a red flag?
So love bombing, it's all about overwhelming someone with, like you said, affection, attention, but very early on. Often before a genuine connection has even had a chance to, form.
Oh, I see. So it's like manufacturing a connection.
Exactly. It's like fast-tracking intimacy and creating this kind of dependence on their validation.
So instead of a slow burn, it's like relationship on fire right from the start.
Yes, exactly. It can feel exciting, all-consuming even, but you have to ask yourself, are they really interested in me, like the real me, or are they just trying to create this fantasy?
It's like they're investing so much so quickly.
Exactly.
You almost feel indebted.
That's the point. It's like down the line, they can use that to control your actions or to make you
Yeah.
feel guilty for, maybe wanting to create some distance if the relationship isn't right for you.
Wow, okay. I see why it's called bombing. Like it explodes and you're left with this mess of guilt and obligation.
Right? Not healthy at all.
Speaking of unhealthy, the article also lists social isolation as a red flag. This one feels, I don't know, almost sneaky
Mm, yeah,
because it can be hard to spot, maybe.
absolutely. And it ties directly back to control. Abusers, and it doesn't have to be, physical abuse, but anyone who's trying to control you, they often try to isolate you from your support systems. So that's friends, family, even colleagues, anyone who might, give you a reality check.
It's like they want you all to themselves. So
Exactly.
they're the only voice you hear.
They might make you feel guilty for spending time with other people, criticize your loved ones, or even try to sabotage those relationships.
Oh, wow. So it can be really insidious.
Yeah, And it's all about them trying to maintain that power and control.
So it's like they're cutting off all your lifelines so you have nowhere to turn but to them?
Essentially.
Yeah.
And that's why maintaining those connections, those outside connections, is so, so crucial.
It's like they're slowly shrinking your world until it revolves entirely around them. That's scary stuff. You know, thinking about all this control and isolation, it makes the next red flag feel particularly icky. Jealousy. Like a little jealousy is normal.
Well, yeah, I mean, who hasn't felt a little twinge of jealousy now and then? It's human, right? But we're not talking about a little twinge here. The article, it cautions us about that, like constant, unfounded suspicion. The kind that makes you feel like you're always walking on eggshells.
It's like the difference between, oh, they want to spend time with me versus, oh my gosh, they're checking my every move.
Yes. And the article really emphasizes how this kind of toxic jealousy, it often stems from insecurity, and it can be so damaging.
That has nothing to do with you, really.
Right, it's about them.
It's about them and their own stuff.
Projecting their own insecurities onto you instead of, actually dealing with them.
Not cool. So, speaking of, I guess, healthy communication, or the lack thereof, the article also lists conflict avoidance as a red flag, which I have to admit kind of threw me for a loop. Isn't avoiding fights a good thing? Like, isn't that what we're all striving for?
Well, on the surface, right. I mean, no one loves a good argument.
Right.
But the article makes this really interesting point. It says that if you're constantly avoiding conflict, what you're really doing is bottling up all those feelings. You're not actually addressing those important issues.
So it's not about picking fights, but it's also not about just like letting things fester.
Exactly.
It's about finding that balance.
Finding that sweet spot where you can, have those tough conversations respectfully. The article actually argues that constructive conflict, when it's handled properly, is actually healthy. It helps the relationship grow.
Oh, interesting. So it's like, it's not about avoiding these disagreements. It's about how you approach them. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another communication pitfall, the inability to, just communicate openly and honestly. And I don't just mean texting habits.
Oh, no, although that's a whole other deep dive.
Seriously, we'll save that for another day.
But yeah, the article really emphasizes vulnerability, authenticity in communication.
Being real with each other.
Exactly. If you're constantly shutting down conversations, being evasive, or just unwilling to share what's really going on in your head and your heart, it creates all these misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And eventually resentment. Right?
Yeah, because you're not actually connecting, are you?
Exactly.
It's like they're building walls instead of bridges.
100%.
And speaking of communication breakdowns, let's talk about the red flag of a lack of emotional support. This one feels particularly relevant to, our listeners today. We know they're all about personal growth. They want deep connection.
Absolutely.
And this is huge.
This is a big one.
So how do you know, is it just a bad day or is this a red flag? What are the signs?
Well, the article stresses that it's about patterns, not just isolated incidents.
Okay, so not just one-off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not about your partner being your personal cheerleader 24/7, but it is about feeling seen, heard, and respected, especially when you're going through those challenging times.
Because that's when you need them the most.
100%. Think back to a time when you shared something important with your partner. Maybe it was a personal achievement, or maybe it was a struggle you were facing. How did they react? Did they listen? Really listen?
Did they try to understand?
Yeah. Or did they dismiss how you were feeling? Offer unsolicited advice? Or just completely change the subject back to themselves?
Because it's like that saying, right? People don't always remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel.
100%. And if you consistently walk away from those conversations feeling unheard, invalidated, or even criticized, that's a problem.
It's amazing how much those small moments, those little interactions can impact how we feel in a relationship and whether we feel connected or, totally the opposite.
Totally.
And speaking of feeling heard, the article also brings up this idea of a lack of emotional intelligence as a potential red flag. So how does that play out in a relationship? What does that even look like?
Well, emotional intelligence, it's all about, being aware of and managing your own emotions,
right,
but also being sensitive to the emotions of others.
Yeah.
So if someone is lacking that emotional intelligence, it can create this disconnect in the relationship.
It's like they're speaking a different language.
Exactly.
But it's not even a language you can translate.
Oh.
It's just what is happening.
Exactly. You're just not speaking the same language at all. And that can lead to I mean, constant misunderstandings,
Yeah.
conflicts that like spiral out of control
Oh, yeah.
because you're not able to meet in the middle.
Right. And you end up feeling totally misunderstood.
You can end up feeling unheard.
Yeah.
And if they can't recognize, like, when their actions are hurtful, that's a problem.
It's like they're missing that emotional radar that helps
Yes.
you read the room,
Right,
you
yeah.
know, and navigate all the ups and downs.
Absolutely.
Speaking of navigating, the article also touches on codependency as a red flag. And this one feels tricky, you know, especially in relationships where, like, maybe one or both partners are naturally giving, you know, or they're natural caretakers.
Yeah, and it can be hard to spot.
Because it's disguised as this, like, loving thing.
Right, exactly. Because at its core, it's about two people becoming, I think, overly reliant on each other
Okay.
to the point where they lose kind of their sense of individuality.
So you lose yourself in the relationship.
Yeah, and you become so entangled
Yeah.
that it's like, who are you outside of this other person?
Exactly. It's like you're no longer two whole people choosing to be together. It's
Yeah.
like you need the other person to feel complete.
Right, exactly.
And that's where things get, you know,
That's where it gets messy.
messy.
Yeah, you start seeking validation and fulfillment from the other person rather than, from within yourself.
And you're giving away your power in that process.
Exactly.
Which kind of makes me think of another red flag that can really mess with your sense of self. Gaslighting. Okay, so break this one down for us.
Okay, so gaslighting. This is a form of emotional manipulation
Okay.
where someone is trying to make you doubt your own sanity.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, super scary.
Because it can be so subtle.
It's so insidious.
Right.
It's like they might deny your reality, twist your words around.
Make you feel like you imagined it.
Exactly.
Even though, like, you experienced it.
You know what happened.
Yeah.
And the article gives this example of, like, let's say someone denying that they said something hurtful.
When you know they did.
Even if you remember it crystal clear,
Right.
they might try to convince you that your emotional reaction was, like, totally overblown or irrational.
Yeah, like you're being too sensitive.
Right, exactly.
Or you're making a big deal out of nothing.
And over time, that can really eat away at your self-esteem.
Right, because you start to question yourself.
You start to question your own reality.
Like, am I the crazy one?
Yeah, and that's what they want you to think.
That is terrifying. Okay, so we've covered a lot today.
We have covered so much.
Like, we've talked about controlling behaviors, love bombing, jealousy,
Ton of red flags.
conflict avoidance, emotional support,
All the things.
emotional intelligence, codependency, gaslighting. Like, whoa. So for our listener who's, maybe feeling a little overwhelmed right now, maybe they're even, like, recognizing some of these red flags in their own relationships, where do they go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Here.
And the first step, and the article emphasizes this over and over, is just awareness.
Okay.
Just being able to recognize these red flags, understanding, like, what they are and how they might be showing up in your own life. That's huge.
So knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power, but you got to do something with it.
Oh, okay.
Because, knowledge without action is like a car without an engine. It's not going anywhere.
All right.
So once you've identified some of those things that maybe you want to change, you got to figure out, what do you want to do about it?
That makes sense.
Right.
But that can feel, I don't know, kind of daunting. Like, where do you even begin? What does the article recommend for actually addressing these things?
Well, they recommend starting with the thing we were talking about before, honest communication.
Okay.
Talk to the person about what's going on, how you're feeling.
But be prepared for, like, some pushback.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially if these are behaviors that have been, ingrained over time, they might get defensive.
Right.
But you have to be firm about, your needs, your boundaries.
So it's about taking ownership of your side of the street.
Yes, exactly. You
Mhm.
can't control how they're going to react,
Right.
but you can control how you respond.
And sometimes the healthiest response is to, walk away
100%.
if the relationship's not serving you.
If it's not good for you, it's time to reassess,
Exactly.
and that's okay.
That's a hard thing to do, but like you said, it takes courage. It takes self-awareness.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we're wrapping up this deep dive, any final thoughts for our listeners? Something to kind of keep them thinking about, their own patterns.
I would say think about one small, tangible action
All right.
that you can take today, literally today, to start building healthier relationships. Maybe it's having that conversation we were talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe it's setting a boundary.
Okay.
Maybe it's taking some time for yourself, a little self-reflection.
Yeah.
The journey starts with a single step.
Loved that. Small steps, big changes. Well, on that empowering note, we'll leave you to ponder your next move.
Mhm.
Until next time, happy relationship navigating.